Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. It is Tori, and today I'm going to be giving you my full spoiler thoughts on Memories of Ice by Steven Erikson. Now, for any of you who have been around my channel for a while, you know that I have a very long history with this series. I read the first 4 books in my early 20s when I was in college, and then life just happened and I stopped there, and I've never continued or finished the series up until now. So this last year I embarked on the reread project where I was going to reread Gardens of the Moon through House of Chains and then continue on with Midnight Tides. This is book 3, so I have officially finished 3 out of the 4 reread books, and there is so much in this book to talk about that I could be here for days and still not get to everything that happens in this book that I could talk about. As you can see, as I was notating as I was reading, and I had a lot of thoughts. But I want to just kind of go through some of the main highlights for me and just kind of generally talk about it. This is completely unscripted. I tried scripting it. We're going to throw that out because at the end of the day, I just need to talk about this book. A lot of the focus for me in this review is probably going to be character focused because that is the type of reader that I am. I am going to dig into the magic and the plot a little bit, but the focus is definitely going to be heavily on characters. So let's talk about this book first in conjunction with books 1 and 2. Book 1 and 2 have this very intimate kind of feel to them, despite the fact that everything happening around the characters is so vast. We get the hinting of just how epic in scope the world of Malazan really is in Gardens of the Moon and Deadhouse Gates, but I think Memories of Ice, for me at least, is the first book where everything kind of starts to blow wide open. We suddenly are getting a lot of lore and history that we were not aware of in the first 2 books. And in my opinion, it's the first time in the series where we really start to get some answers as to what is going on behind the scenes of all of these conflicts. Gardens, I think, kind of starts with a semi-narrow focus and then kind of blossoms outwards. We pick up Deadhouse Gates, it continues to expand, and then by the time we get to Memories of Ice, especially in this first half, Erikson just blows the doors wide open. And I know that there is exponentially more to come, but I think Memories really sets up so much of the world specifically. We get more of the history of the Telanamas. We get more of the history of the Tistiandi. We get more of the conflict between the different houses of the pantheon and the gods, and we hear a little bit more about what's going on with the Warrens. We kind of learn really what Warrens are in a more visual sense in this book, because obviously they exist and are utilized in Gardens and Deadhouse, but I feel like this is the first book where, again, things just become a lot more clear and answered. Not to say we have all the answers in this book, because we certainly don't. But anyways, I really feel like this one steps up the scope of what we know about the world so much. Part of that, I think, works, for me at least, worked against the story in the first probably half of the book. I trudged through the first half of this book, and I love this series, I love these characters, I love this story, so it's not a matter of enjoyment, but it definitely was slow paced for me, which is interesting because I actually find Deadhouse Gates to be more engaging and faster paced than this, which is apparently weird to a lot of people. I've heard from quite a few other Malazan readers that have had the completely opposite experience. But a lot of what happens in the beginning centers around long conversations and exposition of lore and history within the command tent of One Arm's host. We have Whiskey Jack, we have Corlott, we have Silver Fox, who of course is this amalgamation of multiple characters. We get a little bit deeper into Tool's story, which I absolutely... Tool is just, I mean, I think we can all agree, right, as Malazan fans, that Tool is just one of the coolest characters in this series, and I look forward to hopefully being around him for the rest of Malazan because he's amazing. There's so many characters, you guys. There's so many things to talk about. Okay, the first thing that I want to talk about is a motif that Erikson uses in this series that I love. And I talk about it a lot when in reference to Dead House Gates and A House of Chains and some of the arcs that go through those two books. But we see it here in Memories of Ice as well. And it's the motif of armor. And that is a motif that I really, really love seeing explored in fantasy. And I think Erikson does it just masterfully. This idea of metaphorical armor and how we shield ourselves from not only our fellow humankind, but also from ourselves and the things that are happening to us within life and the things that we're exposed to and experience. And I love Erikson's dissection of that motif throughout Malazan. It comes back full strength in Memories of Ice, and that makes me incredibly happy. So I'm just going to go through and kind of speed drop a bunch of quotes and stuff on you guys for how that motif of armor constantly shows up in this story. So Harlow is talking to Stani in chapter 4 and trying to flirt with her basically, and he asks her if the iron petals of her heart would unfold for me. And she says, "There's no such thing as iron petals," Stani snorted. "You don't get iron flowers. And hearts aren't flowers. They're big, red, messy things in your chest." Which is like, it's a little bit quieter than some of the other armor motifs, but I noted that one because I really like that he draws attention to it in so many different ways and so many different turns of phrase throughout the story. Actually, I think that's in chapter 3, the Stani and Harlow conversation. In chapter 4, we have PATRON, who is doing a little self-reflection, and he says, "Armor encumbers, restricts the body and soul within it, but it also protects. Blows are blunted, feelings lose their edge, leaving us to suffer naught but a plague of bruises, and after a time, bruises fade." What I love so much is that Erikson continually uses the armor motif, especially heavily with the PATRON siblings. And you see a ton of it in Dead House Gates with Felison, and I've talked about that in my Felison video before, and we'll probably talk about it again when I go back and review Dead House Gates. But the PATRON siblings especially have a very strong armor motif around them constantly. And the fact that it was so strong in Dead House Gates with Felison, and then we come into Memories of Ice and we hit the ground running right away with PATRON, and he talks about that armor and that, you know, protective layer and trying to keep it in place quite a bit, especially in the first part of the book. So then we go into chapter 7 and we have Itkovian talking to the new recruit, and he's talking about the Kachin Chimal and how deadly they are, and he says, "I trust you've not deluded yourself into believing that witnessing the destruction of more Kachin Chimal will silence the cries within you. Soldiers are issued armor for their flesh and bones, but they must fashion their own for their souls piece by piece." I love this motif so much, you guys. I know that I'm like really focusing in on this, but this was something that I absolutely love in Malazan, and I get really excited when it comes up over and over and over again because I'm a nerd. Now we go back to chapter 11 and we have a conversation between PATRON and Quickben, and they're talking about Trots basically becoming a new tribe leader. And PATRON says, "He's new to responsibility, Captain. You'll have to teach him." PATRON responds self-reflectively in his mind, "Teach him what? How to live beneath the burden of command? That's something I can't manage myself. I need only look into Whiskey Jack's face to understand that no one can. No one who has a heart, anyway. We learn to achieve but one thing, the ability to hide our thoughts, to mask our feelings, to bury our humanity deep in our souls, and that can't be taught, only shown." Again, it's a subtle motif, but it's there. I think at the end, he brings this motif really full circle. We have Itkovian's sacrifice, where we have a full removal of that protective armor, where Itkovian completely opens himself to the pain and the horror and the history of the Talanamas and all of that. And that, to me, is such a beautiful full circle moment for the armor motif, where we have a complete removal of that protective shell from someone. And we're going to get to Itkovian briefly because he's a big part of this book. But that, again, to me, with that armor theme, is just really a beautiful full circle moment where all of these characters are constantly talking about armor and protection and keeping yourself from, you know, becoming overwhelmed and consumed by everything that's happening. And Itkovian kind of represents the very pure self-sacrificial unburdening of armor to take on everyone, what's behind everyone else's, if that makes sense. And along that line, this kind of fits into that theme and also going into Itkovian a little bit. We have this conversation between Whiskey Jack and Silver Fox, which I just love. And it's in chapter 13. Her smile was sardonic. We're very much alike, you know. All we need do is cup our hands and 10,000 souls rush in to fill them. And every now and then, one of us recognizes that fact. And the sudden, overwhelming pressure hardens us a little more deep down inside. And what was soft gets a little smaller, a little weaker. Whiskey Jack responds, not weaker, Silver Fox. Rather, more concentrated, more selective. That you feel the burden at all is proof that it remains alive and well. What I love about that conversation, not only in regards to the armor theme that we've been talking about, but also if you take that conversation and you contrast it again with Itkovian's sacrifice later on in the book, I think, again, that's a really beautiful kind of culmination of a lot of those conversations. And you see Whiskey Jack with all of this responsibility and these tens of thousands of soldiers that look up to him. You have Silver Fox, who has the burden of the Talan A and the Talanamas and all of these souls that have been basically stuck for hundreds of thousands of years, and the burden of that. And they're talking about how to manage that and how to survive that and how to, you know, stay guarded. And Itkovian again walks in and just completely removes the armor. So I wanted to throw the armor theme out there right away because that's one that I love throughout the series. And it made me really excited when I saw how much it was popping up in Memories of Ice. And that's something I didn't remember from my first read through. And not just Itkovian's sacrifice, but also after Whiskey Jack's death. And Corlott is trying so hard to stay within her armor. She's trying so hard to hide behind that armor and not grieve. And the conversations that she has briefly with her brother, where he's encouraging her to let go, to grieve, to remove that armor. And this is towards the end of the book. I don't know what chapter this is in. All right, I think this is in chapter 25. I love, this is one of my favorite quotes in the book because it just, it's beautiful. Erickson's prose. That's all I need to say about that. The enemy is destroyed, Corlott. What you would guard staying with me is the heart within you. You would fend it from pain, from loss. Sister, he deserves more. Go down now. To grieve is the gift of the living, a gift so many of our kin have long lost. Do not retreat. Descend, Corlott, to the mortal realm. Okay. So as you can see, I was obsessed mildly with that theme throughout the book. So I just wanted to bring that up and talk about it and show you guys like my thought process going through the different quotes as I was reading. But let's get into some of the other stuff now. So warrens were something that I really wasn't clear on for a long time, and when we discover in Memories of Ice that the warrens are literally the veins, like living veins of the elder god Kruppe, and also we find out that the crippled god is poisoning the warrens and that he is basically trying to slowly destroy and kill magic and sorcery itself. And through that, he's going to be getting rid of a lot of the other Pantheon members. We get the history of the Talana Mas. We have the history of the characters within Silverflux. Obviously, we know Tattersail from Gardens of the Moon. We love Tattersail, but we get now a little bit of backstory with Nightchill and Bellerdan. And again, I didn't connect right away that Nightchill was the sister of Cold Knights because I live under a rock apparently. But again, really, really cool to see such a wide timeline of history. I think that's one of the reasons why this book feels so much more expansive than the other two so far. I'm gonna mention Stani and Gruntle and Harlow and that whole group briefly, just to say they're one of my least favorite storylines through this book. I like them a lot, and I love, especially once Gruntle becomes Trake's mortal sword and he raises the child's tunic standard. That whole section is just so incredibly good and profound. And his revenge for what happened to Stani. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later with some of my mild critiques of this book specifically. So I'll come back to that. But I do really like how we are seeing, I think, the Pantheon a little bit more physically manifested in this book as well. Since we already talked about Whiskey Jack and Corlott, let's just go there. I love them. I love them so much. They are just a wonderful combination, and I love that they find each other despite everything going on crazily around them. Whiskey Jack is such a steady anchor in this series, and I love that he's such an epitome of what a good leader is, and how much he cares about the people around him is just beautiful. And for Corlott to see through that armor and that facade, that I think Whiskey Jack is actually pretty open compared to a lot of the other characters, but for her to see that and to be drawn to it and to have the two of them, you know, come together and just really give each other a deeper, more experienced kind of love is so beautiful. And I love that kind of romance in my fantasy. I love them so much. Whiskey Jack's death is something that I need to chat about at the end when I talk about critiques that I have of this book. Not to say that it isn't impactful and that I didn't get really emotional, because I did, especially the part where Quickben and PATRON go into Moonspawn alone to just honor the dead bridge burners. That's where I got emotional. I cried. And that scene is just, it's so haunted and beautiful. But we'll get back to Whiskey Jack in a little bit, but I love Whiskey Jack and Corlott. I love Whiskey Jack always having faith in the people around him and that he never loses that. Another group that we need to talk about briefly is Lady Envy and the Segula and Beljag and Gareth, because they single-handedly brought me through the first half of this book. I loved those sections, and Tool and Talk with that group. The whole thing was just incredibly wonderful. I think Lady Envy is a masterclass on how to write a really good, interesting, layered femme fatale character, and I love that about her. I think she feels very ancient, but she also has this pettiness to her, but she's also just so insanely deadly that she's basically untouched through the entire book, despite the fact that the number of enemies that they take on is monumental, and she walks through it with a clean Talaba, so like kudos. But the Segula, I think, are a fantastic addition to this book. I love them. I love the rivalry between them and Tool, and the fact that we get so much culture just from basic interactions between these characters. Talk and Tool also are a bromance in this book that deserves all of the love and hype. Talk, just realizing how out of place he is and how on the totem pole of power, he's basically not helpful at all when it comes to the group that he's in. But yet him calling Tool friend and building this relationship with him, which then leads Tool to come to his rescue later on in the book. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. When Tool comes and busts through the city to find him, I was just emotional and cheering from the sidelines. It was awesome. I love that story arc so much. Despite the fact that the torture that Tok has to go through is so incredibly hard to read, and just, again, I think illustrates how good Erikson is at those fantasy horror elements within the story. We saw it in Dead House Gates as well. There's a lot more of it in Memories of Ice. Bruchalian's sacrifice and then Itkovian's sacrifice afterwards. Bruchalian is an interesting character, and I think I really like his arc, even though we only get bits and pieces of him. And I think he kind of paves the way for Itkovian, and it just goes to show the kind of men that they were. And, you know, the old saying that like attracts like, Bruchalian and Itkovian were both very strong, self-sacrificial people. And you see that through their story arcs in the books, and I think it really adds to the layer of underdog power that the defenders of Kapistan had, and why their story was so sympathetic and tense throughout the entire read. I actually weirdly got a little bit more emotional at Bruchalian's death than at Itkovian's, if I'm being totally honest. What got me about Itkovian's death was actually the part where everyone comes in to add their gifts to his barrow. That got me. That really got me. That was such a beautiful display of gratitude and honor, and it just was beautiful. Also, we have this kind of bookend story of the Jagat children who were rescued by the Bonecaster, and that kind of bookends the story. I think that's one of my favorite bits of history that we get in the books so far, and I really like the tie-in at the end where the sister is freed and the brother now has to raise her and take care of her in a space that they've been set apart in. It's so hard to narrow this down, you guys, because I feel like every character arc in this book, in this series, could have entire hours long reviews done of them, and I definitely want to dig in a little bit deeper on some of these at some point. Another one that I should definitely talk about is Silver Fox and the Mybi. The focus on motherhood and how much we mothers give both physically and emotionally to our children, I think is handled in a way that is really beautiful and respectful in this book. I think that is a reality of motherhood that I don't think gets talked about that much. And as a mother myself of 3 children who I would die for in the absolute blink of an eye, and that I just love with my entire being, it's impossible to explain a mother's love to someone who hasn't been a mother, if that makes sense, and a mother in any respect. There's a reason why it's often referred to as one of the most powerful forms of love on earth. Erikson deconstructing that with Silver Fox and the Mybi really got to me a few times, because I can see the pain of the Mybi struggling with the changes and how she feels like her entire identity is to feed Silver Fox and to, you know, help Silver Fox become stronger. And is she even really a person? Does she have any humanity left? And that's such a extreme but important struggle that I think a lot of moms face in reality all the time. This idea of, who am I apart from motherhood? And motherhood, for me at least, is one of the most important things in my life. It will always be that way, and my children are my priority. There are definitely moments where, as mothers, I think we sit down and we struggle with that from time to time. And not always to the extent of the Mybi, obviously. but also seeing Silver Fox just ridden with guilt about what she's taking from her mother, and recognizing, I think on a generational scale, even if you take motherhood out of it, what we've taken from the generations above us and now have shouldering the responsibility to give back or to give forward. I think even apart from motherhood, it's a very, very strong and powerful message. One of the things I'm still kind of confused about, and this is something that I've just kind of relaxed into and I'm gonna figure it out as I go. The deck is still confusing to me. I'm pretty solid on the Warrens now at this point, but the deck is still something that I'm trying to wrap my mind around, so we're getting there. PATRON being the master of the deck is a story element that, like, I don't really care about, if I'm being totally honest. It'll be interesting to see how that factors into the rest of the series, but in all, I'm not really fussed about it. We can talk about the Bridge Burners. Really all I have to say about them, as I'm wearing my Bridge Burners t-shirt, is that I love them. I love the motley crew that is the Bridge Burners. I love the grittiness and the no-nonsense, get work done attitude of the Bridge Burners, and yet how human they all are, that they have these moments. They all have their flaws. They're all, you know, have their moments even of cowardice constantly, and I think they're just such a well-rounded motley crew of soldiers that I just love them. That's really all I have to say about the Bridge Burners. And I'm very curious to see what happens, because nobody's actually ever dead in Malazan. Like, nobody actually dies. I'm pretty sure Itkovian's dead, but I could be wrong. Like, everybody comes back in Malazan. Resurrection tropes typically are not my thing, so I am curious to see as I get further in the series how these ascendancies and rebirths or resurrections are utilized in the rest of the series, because just based on principle, I'm not a giant fan of them, because I feel like it lessens the impact a lot of a death. Let's talk about some of my critiques of this book. I realize there are going to be things that I missed talking about. I can see you guys in the comments already. How come you didn't talk about this? You guys, there's so much. I'm doing my best. I would really like to do more Malazan videos anyway, so if there are specific things that you guys would like me to dig into a little bit more, feel free to leave them down in the comments, and I might take those as video ideas for the future as well. But let's talk about my critiques of this book a little bit. First of all, Dead House Gates still beats it out for me. Hands down. That's not a competition still. The first half of this book was almost painfully slow for me in a lot of ways. Like I said, minus Lady Envy and the Segula with Tool and Talk. Love them. They kept me going. It's very slow, and there is so much information dumped on us in the beginning, especially the beginning half of this book, and the exposition and the lore and the history. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I felt like my head was spinning through most of the first half of this book, and I didn't enjoy the story that was being told as much because of that, and that's definitely a me thing, but it's one of the main reasons why Memories of Ice does not beat out Dead House Gates for me. And also, one of the things I noticed in my read this time of Memories of Ice is some of the conveniences that I felt. There were moments where character kind of fell by the wayside for plot a little bit, which is something that drives me nuts. And there were three major moments of that I noticed. Okay, so the first one that I wanted to talk about was the assault that Stani experiences. Now, I have seen Erikson handle sexual violence in the past in these books very, very well. However, this one I felt like came out of nowhere and kind of just served as a way to make Gruntle mad enough to go on the warpath, to be honest. That really bothered me, because up until this point, all we know about the Seers people and the Seer Domans and everything is that they are cruel killers, that they feed a whole host of cannibals. I just felt like it was one of those things where it didn't make sense to me that there would be, like, suddenly the sexual violence side of things just came out of nowhere, and didn't really feel like it was something that was within character for the Seer's army, I guess, if that makes sense. because everywhere else in the entire story we're told that everyone's just killed and eaten right away. So I don't know. That was just a little nitpick for me. That one wasn't really a make or break, but I wasn't really a fan of it just because it felt like the only reason it happened was to drive Gruntle forward. The other one, slightly moving up a level, was Tok leaving Lady Envy in the Segula and Tool, which again, there are some arguments, of course, for why he would leave, in terms of feeling like, you know, he's generally a loner, he's a scout, but for me, it really felt like Erikson needed him to be captured by the Seer and to be tortured and for that whole storyline to go on, and the only way that happens is if Tok leaves Lady Envy in the Segula, because how else is the Seer going to get to him? So that felt very plot-driven to me, and I didn't love that. I love what he does with the story arc, but that aspect of it really bothered me because it just felt like... And now Tok leaves because he needs to go over here so that the Seer can torture him. You know. The final convenience critique that I have for this book that really was the one that threw me off in the biggest way was Calor actually killing Whiskey Jack. So through the entire book, we have a character that nobody trusts because he is a loose cannon. He is very obviously, you know, got his sights set on Silver Fox. He hates her because of Night Chill's presence in her makeup of souls. He is dangerous. He is constantly making threats. He is constantly driven by his ego and telling everyone just how amazing he is, even though we've had no proof of it this entire time. Like, oh, I'm like a big deal and you need me to win this campaign. And I'm like, why though? Honestly. We get to the end and everyone just decides randomly that, like a group of people just decide randomly that Calor is now trustworthy. That, oh, Calor feels bad and he wants to apologize and he wants to go out on the front line with Corlott and Whiskey Jack and be around Silver Fox. And Kaladin Brood is just like, okay, yeah, that's fine, totally. And even Corlott, who's like, meh, something smells fishy about this, but I guess it's fine. Whiskey Jack's like, hey, yeah, accept your apology, my dude, very cool. Calor just shows up, everyone suddenly decides he's trustworthy, and then he kills Whiskey Jack the minute Silver Fox shows up. So for me, at least, that was a big... That was a big convenience moment, and it really, I think, heavily lessened the impact of Whiskey Jack's death for me the second time around, because I don't think that I had, like, looked at it that closely the first time I read, and that really felt plot-driven to me, and it made me really mad, because I was like, there's no reason Calor should be here. There is no reason. And the reason he gives Kaladin Brood is literally like, you need my military strategy and prowess because I'm a genius and you won't win tactically. You need me. You need me on the front lines. There has been no evidence the entire book that anyone needed Calor's help. Literally. Like, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't do anything. Anyways. So that one really bothered me, and I'm sure, like, there are people who are gonna have different opinions to me on these things, and that is completely fine. And again, I want to reiterate, I love this series, so don't take me the wrong way here. Kaladin Brood is a character that I'll talk about really briefly too. I find him incredibly interesting, but I honestly didn't feel like I got enough of him in this book to really form a solid opinion. I think he's really cool and interesting, and I look forward to him in future books. But that's pretty much all I have to say about Kaladin right now. Let's talk about Kruppe to close us out, shall we? Kruppe is a character that I have traditionally hated. I can't stand Kruppe. I can't stand him at all. I really don't like his character archetype, and I really don't like him. In this book, he had a few moments that I liked him better than I remembered, which surprised me. And when he's helping the Mybi and helping Silver Fox and kind of, you know, Mostly it's when he opens his mouth that I don't like Kruppe. When he's just being nice to people and helping out, I'm fine with him. But as soon as he opens his mouth, I'm like, dude, no, stop. Just stop. Like, it's no secret at this point that Kruppe is more than he seems. Capital M, capital T, etc. I'm interested to see what his connection with Kruppe actually is and how he factors into the larger picture of the series. But, ugh, you guys, I can't with Kruppe. Oh, I need to briefly mention Corbel, Broach, and Bauchelain. I hate them. I don't like them. They give me the ick. That's all I have to say. Like, but I will say, bless Rhys, okay? Emancipor Rhys, bless his heart. Bless his heart. That's all. He's basically the C-3PO of Malazan, and he is indentured to these two awful, horrible, disgusting people. And I feel for him, and I love his character so much. So much. Shout out to Emancipor Rhys, honestly. So anyways, that is my overall review of Memories of Ice. I am so excited to move on to House of Chains and keep going with the series. This series is so good, you guys. I love it so much, and I got so much out of it in this read, and I love it even more than I did the first time, but I still loved it the first time, so don't tell people that they have to reread Malazan in order to have a good time with this series. Stop doing that. But anyways, that's all I have to say for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments what you think, where Memories of Ice stacks up in the ranking of the series for you, what your favorite parts of the book were. Thank you for watching and for going along this journey with me. I hope you guys are reading some 5-star reads, having a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.